I never thought I'd live to see the day my own son would hand me an eviction notice. That single sheet of paper trembled in my hands like it carried the weight of my entire life. The words "Notice to Vacate" glared at me in bold letters, and beneath them was his name, Ethan Miller, my only child. For a few seconds, my brain refused to process it. I had to blink several times, half expecting the ink to rearrange itself into something less cruel. But no, it was real. My son was evicting me from the home I'd lived in for 28 years, the same home where I'd raised him alone after his father passed. My name is Linda Miller, and this is the story of how love turned into betrayal, and how karma, with perfect precision, came back around. The irony was painful. This house wasn't just a house, it was the place I'd fought for. I'd taken double shifts at the diner, skipped vacations, and patched the roof myself to keep a roof over our heads. Ethan used to help me when he was little, clumsy hands covered in paint, his laughter echoing down the hall. But lately, those memories felt like ghosts. After Ethan married Vanessa, things began to shift. She was younger than him, confident, always dressed like she'd stepped out of a magazine. At first, I tried to like her. I told myself she'd bring light into Ethan's life after years of struggle. But something about her always felt off. She smiled too wide and spoke too sweetly, especially when she wanted something. She insisted I move into the guest house in the backyard to give them space, as she put it. I agreed. It was small but cozy, and I didn't want to intrude. After all, Ethan and I had always been close. I trusted him. But slowly, little things started to change. Vanessa began managing the bills. She convinced Ethan to restructure the property into both their names. She said it was just a formality, but when I asked about it, she laughed and said, "Don't worry, Mom, you'll always have a place here." I wanted to believe her. I needed to. That night, after he handed me the eviction notice, I sat alone at the kitchen table, tracing the rim of my teacup. Ethan had left without much explanation, just a muttered, "It's for the best, Mom. Vanessa and I need the space." For the best. I looked around the room, at the faded curtains I'd sewn myself, the family photos on the wall, the creaky chair that still wobbled after all these years. Every inch of this place carried my fingerprints. How could my own son see me as an inconvenience? When I called him later that night, he didn't answer. Vanessa picked up instead, her tone sugary sweet. "Linda, we really think it's time you consider downsizing. You know, maybe a nice senior apartment." "I'm not leaving my home," I said quietly, gripping the phone tighter. Her laugh was soft but sharp. "Well, that's not entirely up to you anymore." The next morning, I woke up to find a locksmith at my door. "Ma'am, I was told to change the locks by the owner," he said awkwardly, holding his tools. "The owner?" I asked, my voice trembling. He checked the work order. "Ethan and Vanessa Miller." I felt the air leave my lungs. "I'm his mother," I whispered, but he just gave me a sympathetic look. As he worked, I stood there on the porch, watching him unscrew the door handle to the home I built from nothing. The sun was rising, painting the house in gold light like a cruel joke. When he left, I sat on the steps for a long time numb. I wasn't angry. Not yet. Just hollow. I told myself there had to be a misunderstanding. Maybe Ethan didn't know what Vanessa had done. Maybe she'd pushed him into this. He wasn't cruel, just easily influenced. That's what I told myself over and over, because the truth that my son wanted me gone was too heavy to bear. That night, I found myself staring out the window of the guest house, watching the lights flicker inside the main home. Through the glass, I saw Vanessa's silhouette move around the kitchen, pouring wine, laughing. Ethan joined her, wrapping his arms around her waist. They looked happy. Effortlessly happy. And for the first time, a small, cold feeling began to crawl up my spine, a quiet unease whispering that this wasn't just about space. Something deeper, darker, was at play. Still, I forced a smile to myself and muttered, "He's my son. He'd never really do this to me." But even as I said it, my voice wavered. Because deep down, I already knew. I wish I could say that eviction notice was the first warning sign, but the truth is, the cracks had started forming long before that. I just chose not to see them. It began with small shifts, subtle, almost invisible changes in Ethan's tone, in the way he'd glance at Vanessa before answering me, or the way he stopped calling me mom and started saying Linda in front of her. It was so slight that I told myself I was imagining it. After all, I'd raised that boy alone. He'd been my whole world. Surely, he couldn't turn cold overnight. It was a Saturday morning when I first felt something truly off. I'd baked his favorite banana bread and walked over to the main house to surprise them. I knocked lightly, waiting for that familiar, "Come in, Mom." But instead, Vanessa opened the door, her perfect hair curled, her nails freshly done, and her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, Linda. You should have called first," she said, glancing behind her shoulder. "I just wanted to drop this off," I said, holding up the bread. "I made Ethan's favorite." She hesitated for a moment before taking it, her manicured fingers brushing the edge of the foil. "That's sweet of you. But we're actually about to head out." "Out? I thought Ethan was helping me fix the heater today." "Oh," she said, pretending to think. "Right. He must have forgotten. He's busy right now." I peeked past her shoulder, just enough to see Ethan sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through his phone. "Ethan?" I called softly. He looked up, startled. "Mom, I told you not to come over without warning." The words hit harder than they should have. Not because of what he said, but how he said it. Like I was a burden. Vanessa leaned against the doorframe, smiling faintly as if she was enjoying every second of my discomfort. "I'll just head back then," I said quietly. As I walked away, I heard her voice as soft, but sharp as glass. "See? This is why boundaries matter." Boundaries. From my own son. That night, I sat in my small guest house, the heater still broken, watching the shadows of the main house flicker across the yard. Laughter drifted through the window, Vanessa's high-pitched giggle followed by Ethan's voice. I told myself it was fine. That maybe I was being too sensitive. But then the bills started changing. I used to handle all the utilities and maintenance payments. Suddenly, everything was being redirected through Vanessa. When I asked Ethan about it, he brushed me off. "Vanessa's better at organizing finances," he said. "It's just easier this way." Easier for who? I tried to keep calm, but little by little, I started feeling like an outsider in my own home. She rearranged the living room, replaced my old photos with modern art, and even accidentally boxed up some of my keepsakes, including a photo of Ethan's late father. When I asked where it went, she said, "Oh, that old thing. I think it got mixed with the donation pile." My chest tightened. That picture was irreplaceable. "Vanessa," I said carefully, "that photo was important to me." Her lips curled. "I'm sure it was. But we're trying to create a fresh start, you know? A modern home. A fresh start. Without me, apparently." Weeks went by, and Ethan grew distant. Every conversation felt rehearsed, short, polite, like talking to a stranger. One evening, I decided to make his favorite dinner, hoping we could talk like we used to. I cooked lasagna, the same recipe his father loved, and invited them over. Vanessa showed up 20 minutes late, wearing a designer dress, scrolling on her phone. Ethan trailed behind, looking tired. "Dinner smells nostalgic," she said with a faint smirk, sitting down at the table. I smiled nervously. I thought we could have a nice family evening. Halfway through dinner, Vanessa casually mentioned they were thinking of redecorating the property, again. Ethan nodded. "Yeah, maybe even renovating the guest house." I looked up confused. "But I live there." He avoided my eyes. "It's just a thought, Mom. Don't take it personally." Something in my stomach turned cold. That night, after they left early, claiming they had an early morning meeting, I walked through the empty house. Their plates still half full, their laughter still echoing faintly in my ears. I leaned against the counter and whispered, "What happened to you, Ethan?" But deep down, I already knew the answer. It wasn't just him anymore. Vanessa's influence had sunk its claws deep, and my son was slipping further away. Still, part of me refused to believe he'd betray me. I told myself maybe he was under pressure, maybe she was just helping. But every time I saw them together, her arm linked through his, that controlling look in her eyes, my instincts screamed louder. Something wasn't right. And yet, I pushed the feeling down. Because admitting the truth, that the boy I raised might be turning against me would shatter what little hope I had left. So I smiled through the ache, convincing myself it was all in my head. But intuition doesn't lie. And deep down, I could already sense it. A storm was coming. I always believed betrayal came like thunder, loud, sudden, impossible to ignore. But when it finally arrived for me, it came quietly, with a folded piece of paper slipped under my door. That morning started like any other. The smell of rain drifted through the cracked window as I made my coffee. My hands trembled slightly, a side effect of too many sleepless nights. Then I saw it. An envelope, white and crisp, with my name typed neatly on the front, Linda Harper. For a moment, I thought it might be from the property manager, maybe another notice about maintenance or taxes. But when I opened it, my world tilted. Eviction notice. The words blurred as I read them again and again. The property I'd lived in for 32 years, the home I built with my late husband, the same one I raised my son in, was no longer mine. I had 30 days to vacate. I thought it had to be a mistake. A cruel joke. My hands shook as I grabbed my phone and called Ethan. He didn't answer. I tried again. Still nothing. Finally, Vanessa picked up. "Vanessa," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I just got a notice saying I'm being evicted." "There must be some mistake." "Oh," she interrupted, her tone cold and smooth. "No, it's not a mistake." My breath caught. "What do you mean?" "Ethan and I talked about this for weeks," she said, as if discussing what to have for dinner. "We've decided to remodel the property and sell the guest house. It's time to move on." I gripped the edge of the counter. "Move on? From me?" She sighed, as though I were a child who couldn't grasp something simple. "Linda, you've had your time here. You're getting older, and maintaining this property isn't good for you. We've already talked to a realtor." "You what?" "I understand this is emotional," she said. "But we're doing what's best for everyone. Ethan will come by later to talk it through." The line went dead before I could respond. I stood there, my chest tight, my ears ringing. For a few seconds, I couldn't breathe. My knees gave way, and I sank to the floor. They had planned this. My own son, the boy I'd sacrificed everything for, had signed my eviction. That evening, Ethan showed up. His face looked drawn, pale. He didn't even knock before walking in. "Mom, we need to talk," he said softly. I looked up at him, searching his eyes for any sign of regret. "Ethan, please tell me this isn't true." "You wouldn't," he avoided my gaze. "It's not like that." "Then how is it?" My voice broke. "You're evicting your own mother from the home your father built? From the place I raised you?" He rubbed his temples. "Vanessa and I can't afford to keep both houses. The market's good right now. Selling makes sense." I stared at him, disbelief twisting into something colder. "Selling makes sense?" "Ethan, this isn't just a house. This is our history." He finally met my eyes. For a second, I saw a flicker of guilt, and then it was gone. "Mom, you'll be fine. You can rent a small apartment in town. Vanessa said she'd help you find one." The name burned like acid. "Vanessa said?" So this was her idea? He didn't answer, and that silence told me everything. I laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. "I gave up everything for you, Ethan. Worked 2 jobs, skipped meals, sold my wedding ring just to pay your college tuition. And this is how you repay me?" His expression hardened. "Don't make this harder than it has to be." I stared at him, the boy I'd once held in my arms, now a stranger wearing my son's face. He turned to leave, but I stopped him. "Ethan." He froze in the doorway. "One day," I whispered, "you'll realize what you've done. And when you do, I hope it keeps you awake at night." He didn't look back. For days, I couldn't eat. Couldn't sleep. I walked through the house touching every surface, the walls we'd painted together, the kitchen table covered in scratches from years of family dinners. Everything I loved had been reduced to a legal document and Vanessa's smirk. I packed slowly, each box a piece of my heart torn away. Neighbors started whispering, wondering why I was leaving. I couldn't bring myself to tell them the truth, that my own flesh and blood had betrayed me for money and manipulation. One night, I found a text on my phone. From an unknown number. "He's not doing this for money. She wants you gone because she wants the whole property in her name. Be careful." No name. No proof. But it was enough to make something inside me shift. My grief turned to clarity. Vanessa wasn't just cruel, she was calculated. She'd pushed me out, whispered poison into Ethan's ear, and turned him into her puppet. And for the first time in weeks, I stopped crying. Because something new began to take its place. Not hatred. Not vengeance. Resolve. If Vanessa thought she could strip me of my home, my dignity, and walk away unscathed, she'd underestimated the woman who raised her husband from nothing. I might have been down, but I wasn't finished. Not yet. The day I left my home was the day I buried the version of myself that believed love alone could protect me. I stood by the front gate, the one Ethan had painted blue when he was 9, and looked at the for sale sign planted in the yard like a dagger through my heart. The movers carried boxes past me without a word. Every thud of a box hitting the truck felt like an echo of betrayal. Ethan didn't even come to see me off. Vanessa had texted a single line, "Hope the move goes smoothly. Take care. Take care." The words were polite, almost kind, but they dripped with victory. I clenched the small locket around my neck, the one with my late husband's picture inside. "You'd be so disappointed in him," I whispered. The wind picked up, rustling the trees, and I swear for a moment, I felt my husband's presence. Not pitying me. Not consoling me. Reminding me of something I'd forgotten, that I was stronger than I believed. Because no one was coming to save me. No one was going to make things right. If justice was to be served, it had to come from me. My new apartment was small, 1 bedroom, 1 window that overlooked a busy street. The first few days, I felt like a ghost, moving through rooms that weren't mine. But slowly, something began to shift. I started volunteering at the community center again, something I hadn't done in years. I cooked meals for the elderly, helped organize donations, and, in between, listened to people's stories of loss, resilience, and quiet survival. One woman, Gloria, told me, "Sometimes God closes doors so hard you think he's punishing you. But he's just locking you out of rooms you've outgrown." Those words hit me like a spark. Maybe this wasn't my ending. Maybe this was my beginning. One afternoon, while sorting through paperwork, I came across the property deed. My name was missing. Completely gone. I remembered signing some papers months ago. Ethan had told me it was for refinancing. I didn't read them. I trusted him. A sick feeling twisted in my stomach. Vanessa hadn't just convinced him to evict me, she'd manipulated both of us into transferring ownership. My signature was there, but the explanation had been buried in fine print. I sat in silence for a long time, staring at my own handwriting. I could cry, scream, or crumble again. But instead, a strange calm settled over me. They thought they had taken everything. But what they didn't realize was that they'd set me free. Free from their lies. Free from pretending we were still a family. Free to act, without guilt or hesitation. That night, I took out an old notebook. Inside, I began to write every conversation, every detail, every suspicious thing Vanessa had ever said or done. I listed the dates, the bank transfers, even the name of the notary Ethan had mentioned in passing. By the time the sun rose, my notebook was full of clues, and my mind, for the first time in months, was clear. I made coffee, sat by the window, and whispered to myself, "You raised a son. You built a home. You survived grief. You can survive this too." And then, like a flicker of light in darkness, an idea began to form, slow, steady, powerful. I didn't know exactly how I'd fight back, not yet. But I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going to let them get away with it. The next morning, I went to the courthouse. I didn't have money for a lawyer yet, but I could start by pulling public records. The clerk gave me a stack of documents, and I combed through them for hours. And then I saw it, a transfer note. Ethan's signature, and another one underneath. Vanessa's. Not as a witness. Not as a consultant. But as a co-owner. My heart pounded. She had forged her way into ownership of my property. And Ethan either didn't know or didn't care. But here's the thing about betrayal. Once you've been broken by it, you stop fearing pain. You start craving truth. I took a deep breath and smiled for the first time in weeks. They wanted to evict me from my home. Now, I would evict them from their illusion of control. That evening, I sat by the window again. The city lights blurred outside, but inside, I felt sharp, alive, awake. I wasn't the same woman who had begged her son to love her. I wasn't the same mother who cried herself to sleep. I was someone new, someone who understood that dignity wasn't given. It was taken back. I closed my notebook, tucked it under my arm, and whispered, "Your move, Vanessa." Because now, I wasn't the victim in her story. I was the author of my own. And this time, the ending would be mine. They always assumed I was finished. They assumed the woman who folded linens at dawn, who baked pies for church sales and mended socks by hand, would wilt and disappear. That arrogance was their first mistake. The second was underestimating how stubborn grief can make you and how clever a woman can get when she has nothing left to lose. For weeks I moved like a ghost through their lives, keeping my head down while my hands did the work of an investigator. The first rule I learned: paper never lies, people do. So I began with paper. I copied everything. Bank statements. Property deeds. The refinancing documents Ethan had handed me to sign without explanation. I visited the county clerk's office twice, once to pull the transfer paperwork and again to request any recorded affidavits connected to the notary. I found small things Vanessa had left behind in haste, emails where she congratulated herself on finalizing ownership, screenshots of mortgage calculators with my address, and a text where she instructed Ethan to change Mom's utilities to autopay. Each document was a thread. I intended to weave them together into something that couldn't be ignored. Next came the human element. Paper could compel, but people confirmed. I started where Vanessa's influence was strongest, the neighbors and the local handyman who'd known our family for years. I made tea for Mrs. Alvarez across the street and asked her casually about renovations. She sighed and told me how Vanessa had told contractors to leave no trace of my belongings in the attic. I listened and took notes. I volunteered at the community center more often, not just for solace, but to rebuild a web of allies, grocery store clerks, the postman, Gloria from the center who always had a way of getting people to talk. I also cultivated silence. While Vanessa boasted to friends about new property plans, I kept my face soft and empty of reaction. Let them congratulate themselves. Let them brag. They were carving their names into a wall they thought was impenetrable. Every boasting word would become evidence when placed in context. One evening, I parked across the street from their house and watched. Vanessa hosted a dinner party and, true to form, she entertained, laughing bright and loud. Ethan hovered near her like a good soldier. Inside, their guests admired the fresh aesthetic, the new art, the minimalist shelves where my framed photographs had once stood. They applauded the way Vanessa had modernized a family home. I took a photograph from my car, a quiet record of everything she'd erased. But evidence is only half of a plan, the other half is bait. I needed Vanessa to show me, in her own words, that she had sought to remove me with full intent. So I devised a small, gentle trap that would play on her arrogance. I created an email account in a fabricator's name, a faux investor from a distant town interested in unique heritage properties for boutique conversion. It was believable, enough industry jargon, an official-sounding signature. Then I sent it to Vanessa, addressing her recent social media posts about selling and redesigning. The message praised her acumen and asked whether she'd be willing to share more details about the property's acquisition timeline for due diligence. She replied within hours, eager to impress. Her tone was smug, and in her response she detailed dates, names, and the moment she'd secured my portion of the deed. I saved the exchange and printed it. She had stepped into the web. While Vanessa flattered herself with congratulations from strangers, I reached out quietly to a retired paralegal, Ruth, whom I'd met at the community center. Ruth had a sharp mind and a prickly sense of justice. Over tea, I explained what I had and what I needed, someone to review the transfer for irregularities and help me draft a concise timeline that would make any judge flinch. She agreed, eyes hard and steady. "They'll try to gaslight you," she said. "We'll give them light." Social pressure, I realized, would be as effective as legal pressure. Vanessa thrived on community approval. She curated her image like a brand. If the town, the bank, the realtor, the church ladies who hosted their events started questioning her ethics, she'd feel it in the only place that mattered to her, her reputation. So I began speaking quietly to people who mattered. I shared my timeline with a realtor who'd been in contact about listing the property. I handed Ruth's summarized notes to the local bank manager. I didn't demand action. I simply asked for records to be double-checked. Procedures have a way of doing the work you can't. All of this was done slowly, like winter wearing down a stone. Vanessa continued to believe I was broken, a frail, harmless relic. She sent me a fruit basket with a note that read, "Hope you're settling in okay." I accepted it with a smile no one saw. She posted photos of cocktail parties and design magazines. She walked through town with Ethan at her side, both of them radiating confidence. In her mind, the house was hers and my resistance was a quaint anecdote. But confidence built on theft is brittle. The threads I was collecting, emails, witnesses, bank rechecks, were beginning to form a net. I could feel the tightening, not with triumph but with a particular kind of sorrow. I didn't relish ruining a marriage. I wanted what anyone would want when wronged: acknowledgement, restitution, the truth to be clear in broad daylight. One night, after compiling a neat folder of documents, photographs, and sworn statements, I locked it in my small desk drawer and stood at the window. The house across the street was dark. Vanessa had retired, apparently undefeated. I pressed my palm to the cool glass and whispered into the night soon. It wasn't vengeance born of malice. It was simply a woman taking back what was hers with patience, care, and very deliberate steps. They had thought I was finished. They would learn how wrong that assumption could be. The courthouse smelled like old paper and polished wood, the kind of smell that makes promises feel official. I walked in with a folder under my arm and my knees steady. Ruth had told me to breathe, to keep my voice even. She'd bindered every scrap of evidence into neat sections: the forged deed excerpts, Vanessa's boastful emails, the contractor receipts that didn't match the work, Mrs. Alvarez's statement, and the photograph of my own framed memories packed into a donation box. Every page was a small, undeniable truth. Vanessa arrived dripping confidence, the kind that has teeth. She wore a tailored blazer like armor and smiled at familiar neighbors in the gallery as if nothing could touch her. Ethan came too, but he hovered at the edges now, unsure, smaller. The bravado scuffed. They had told themselves the town would rally behind them. They had counted on appearance to drown out facts. The judge called the case with a voice that made the room settle like an animal listening for danger. I sat in the plaintiff's seat and felt every I find me. For a heartbeat, panic flirted with my throat. Then I thought of the blue gate Ethan had painted as a boy, of laughter and lasagna, and the way my husband used to whistle in the yard. I sat up straight and let Ruth speak first. She did something deft and necessary. She did not shout. She did not cry theatrically. She spoke in precise sentences that left no space for the comfortable lies Vanessa loved. She laid the timeline bare, sliding each document across the bench like tiles in a mosaic. "Your Honor," she said, "these signatures show coercion and misrepresentation. The transfer was procured through undue influence and falsified documentation." Ruth called Mrs. Alvarez, who described contractors ordered to remove sentimental items and a neighbor who'd watched boxes labeled family leave the attic. The realtor admitted he'd been given incomplete information. The bank produced a flagged transfer, and then, like the last instrument in an orchestra, I handed the judge the printed email exchange I'd baited Vanessa into sending, her own bragging, in her own words, about the moment she secured the property. The courtroom went still enough to hear the clock tick. Vanessa's face, which had been so used to controlling light and angle, tightened into something raw. She tried to redirect the narrative toward my mental fitness and my inability to manage the property, but the judge had paper. Paper that showed who had filed the new deed, who had signed as co-owner, and the odd notarization whose stamp had been paid for by a shell company linked to Vanessa's friend. Then Ruth leaned forward, her voice the quiet hammer. "Your Honor, we ask not only to void the fraudulent transfer, but to hold the defendants accountable for deceit and restitution of the property." For the first time, Ethan looked at his hands. The man who'd once been so quick to shut the door was suddenly very small inside the frame of the law. He tried to stammer something about pressure, about not understanding the legal language. The judge's look was not cruel, only exacting. "Mr. Miller," he said, "the law recognizes responsibility. Ignorance, especially willful ignorance, is not a shield." When the judge read the interim order, the words landed like a verdict in my bones. The transfer was voided pending further criminal review. Vanessa was enjoined from altering the property, and the court issued a temporary restraining order preventing her from selling or mortgaging the house. The room released a breath it hadn't known it had been holding. Vanessa's jaw worked. Ethan's face crumpled into a landscape of regret. Outside, cameras snapped like a choir of shutters. The gallery of neighbors murmured, some with pity, some with shocked satisfaction. Vanessa's confident mask cracked into fragments. She tried to make a show of dignity as bailiff served the order, but it looked like a costume ripped at the seams. Her friends clustered, whispering like conspirators who had been exposed. I did not cheer. There was no joy in seeing a life unravel. Instead, I felt a quiet, iron thing settle in my chest, relief braided with sorrow. This was not about revenge as spectacle. This was about the mechanics of righting what had been wronged. The judge had done what laws are meant to do when evidence is clear, and Ruth and I had built that clarity, one careful step at a time. Ethan found me in the hallway after the proceedings. He looked older than his years, grief and responsibility etching his face. "Mom," he began, voice thin. For a fraction of a second, I considered the 1,000 ways I could answer. Anger would have been loud and satisfying. But I wanted something truer. "Ethan," I said, "you were my son long before any piece of paper said otherwise." He fell to his knees and buried his face in his hands. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. I didn't see it. I was selfish." I put a hand on his shoulder. Not to comfort him fully, forgiveness is not automatic and some wounds need a long time to close, but because he was still my boy, flawed and human. "You made a choice," I said softly. "And choices have weight." Vanessa, led to a small room by a court officer, gave me one last look, a glare that had somewhere between fear and the calculation of damage control. I felt no triumph looking back. Instead, I saw the exact image of a woman who had traded what mattered for what glittered, and lost both. That night, as I sat at my small kitchen table in my apartment, the city light a quiet smear across the window, I unpacked the small locket and held my husband's picture. The house still had to be restored, repairs and reconciliations loom, legal processes have a slow heartbeat. But one undeniable thing had changed, the scales had tipped. Justice had arrived not as a roar, but as a precise, irrevocable order. I hadn't screamed for it, I had documented it. I hadn't begged, I had prepared. And when the law finally moved, it moved with a calm so certain it felt almost merciful. Outside, the blue gate at home caught the moonlight like a promise. Inside me, something softer grew, the knowledge that strength can be patient, and that sometimes the most devastating justice is the one that arrives quietly, with unwavering inevitability. The air smelled different the morning the movers carried my furniture back into the house. Not like dust or legal ink or the stale perfume of fear, but like clean wood and possibility. Sunlight poured through the kitchen window again, hitting the same spot on the floor where my husband used to set his coffee cup. I traced my fingers across the counter, the grooves of years past still carved beneath the fresh polish. For the first time in a long time, the house felt like it was breathing again. It took weeks for the legal dust to settle. Vanessa's world collapsed in quiet stages. The court's ruling became public record, and soon the whispers began. The same social circle she'd once ruled over with charm and ambition now turned their backs in practiced silence. Her company dropped her after the fraud charges surfaced, and the friends she'd impressed with champagne dinners no longer returned her calls. The irony was sharp and surgical. She had taken everything to prove she could rise higher than the rest, but now she was left with nothing to stand on. Karma didn't come to her screaming. It came wrapped in envelopes stamped final notice and termination of contract. It came in the absence of applause. Ethan, on the other hand, began his slow walk toward redemption. He sold his luxury car and paid part of my legal fees without being asked. It wasn't about money, it was about acknowledgement. He came by often now, humbler, quieter, and not looking for forgiveness, but for understanding. "I'm learning," he said once, staring at the half-painted fence, "that love isn't about control. It's about respect." I nodded. I was still healing, but something in me softened when I saw him repaint the blue gate with careful strokes, the same gate that had once marked the line between us. Inside, I rebuilt my rhythm. Morning tea by the window. Gardening on Sundays. Laughter with the neighbors who had stood by me. There was peace, but it wasn't the same kind of peace I'd known before. It was earned heavier, wiser, stitched together from the pieces of pain I had survived. One evening, I sat in the backyard as the light folded itself gently over the house. The air hummed with summer sounds, crickets, a soft breeze through the trees, distant laughter from the neighbors' kids. I closed my eyes and thought about all I had learned, that trust is a gift, not an obligation. That silence can be stronger than shouting. And that sometimes, you don't need to fight fire with fire, you just need to step back and let truth do its work. People often say revenge is sweet. They're wrong. Revenge, when it's pure, isn't sweet at all, it's cleansing. It doesn't intoxicate, it purifies. It strips away everything fake until only truth stands. Vanessa's downfall didn't bring me joy, but it brought me balance. The world didn't need my fury to punish her. It needed my patience to expose her. And that, I realized, was the most poetic justice of all. Months later, I got a letter in the mail, a formal apology from Vanessa, written in a careful, trembling hand. "I destroyed myself trying to destroy you," she wrote. "You didn't need revenge. You had truth." I placed the letter in the drawer beside my husband's photograph and smiled. Not with triumph, but with peace. Standing in my doorway, I whispered to the empty house, to the ghosts of hurt, to the lessons etched in its walls, "You can't steal what's meant to stay. You can only lose what you never truly deserved." That's the thing about life. It doesn't always shout when it delivers justice. Sometimes it just watches, patient, deliberate, and then lets everything fall into place. The house behind me glowed with golden light, and the blue gate swayed softly in the breeze. I wasn't the same woman who had walked out months ago, broken and betrayed. I was someone stronger, someone who had learned that peace after pain isn't weakness. It's the reward for surviving it. And as I looked up at the darkening sky, I said the words I wish someone had told me sooner. Sometimes, the best revenge is simply living free, fearless, and untouchable. Have you ever faced betrayal so deep it changed you forever? How did you rise from it, with anger, with grace, or with both? Share your story in the comments. Let's remind each other that strength isn't about revenge, it's about recovery. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to know that karma never misses. It just waits for the perfect moment.